The void between stars was never truly silent. High Commander Malvar of the Malthari Dominion knew this better than most. His command throne hummed beneath him, its flowing organic contours pulsing with faint violet bioluminescence as the eclipse of dawn drifted through the black. Around him, the bridge crew moved in practiced silence, their crystalline silver armor catching the soft aurora glow of the ship's energy conduits. The Malthari did not rush. They did not panic. Theirs was a civilization of precision, of elegant calculations and wind-carved strategies, which was why the distress signal was so unsettling. It crackled across the comms in jagged bursts, a crude, unrefined transmission, no encryption, no harmonic resonance, just raw, desperate noise. Malvar's sensory tendrils twitched as the translation matrix parsed the message. This is Colonel Samantha Harriman of the Terran Defense Fleet. Any Allied vessels, under heavy fire, request immediate. Static swallowed the rest. Thalolan, the Dominion's foremost xenologist, tilted his elongated skull, his opalescent eyes narrowing. A human, he murmured, the words vibrating through his throat's resonance chambers. Their kind does not belong in this sector. Malvar exhaled slowly, his breath stirring the faint ionization haze that clung to the bridge's atmosphere. No, they do not. The tactical holodisplay flickered to life, projecting the star system in shimmering purple, white. A single blip pulsed erratically, the source of the distress call. No fleet signatures, no reinforcements, just one vessel, its energy signature weak, flickering like a dying ember. Scan it, Malvar ordered. The eclipse of dawn sensors unfurled like living tendrils, bathing the human ship in waves of probing energy. The data returned in cascading streams, flowing across translucent crystalline panels. Thalolan's fingers danced over the interface, his bioluminescent veins flaring in surprise. It's a warship, he said, disbelief threading his voice. But it's alone. Malvar's mandibles tightened. Humans were a young species, reckless, emotional, prone to irrational acts of defiance. The Dominion had watched them for decades, cataloging their wars, their fractured politics, their crude attempts at interstellar travel. They were a curiosity, nothing more. This ship, this single ship, had ventured into contested space alone. Bring us closer, Malvar commanded. The eclipse of dawn glided forward, its aerogel hull rippling with atmospheric condensers as it adjusted to the void's subtle currents. The human vessel resolved on the view screen, a blocky, angular construct, its hull scarred and pitted from battle. No flowing lines, no organic elegance, just brutal, unforgiving geometry. And then the scanners screamed. Thalolan recoiled as the data surged, a torrent of impossible readings. The human ship's power core wasn't failing. It was cycling. High Commander, Thalolan whispered. Their reactor, it's not damaged, it's charging. Malvar's blood ran cold. The distress call hadn't been a plea for help. It had been a beacon, and now across the void, the human ship's weapons flared to life. The eclipse of dawn shuddered as its sensors recoiled from the human vessel's sudden energy surge. Thalolan's fingers danced across the bioluminescent interface, his crystalline talons trembling as he parsed the data. The readings were wrong. The human ship, designated Iron Resolve, should have been crippled, its reactor barely clinging to life. Instead, it pulsed like a waking beast, its power signature swelling in erratic, terrifying waves. Malvar's crest flared, the aurora patterns along his spine flickering with alarm. He had seen human ships before, clumsy, desperate things, their technology cobbled together from stolen scraps and brute force engineering. But this was something else. The Iron Resolve's hull, though battered, bore the marks of intentional weathering. Each scar placed with precision, each dent a calculated deception. The realization struck him like a void. Cold blade, the distress signal hadn't been a cry for help. It had been a lure. Fall retreat, Malvar barked, his voice cutting through the bridge's stunned silence. Engage the atmospheric condensers. Now, the Malthari vessel twisted in space, its flowing silver-purple hull rippling as it attempted to pivot away. But the human ship was already moving, with a shudder that sent vibrations through the Eclipse's crystalline substructure. The Iron Resolve's primary rail cannons locked into position. They weren't the sleek, elegant weapons of the Malthari. No graceful arcs of ionized energy. These were brutal, angular constructs, their barrels reinforced with layered armor, their magnetic coils humming with barely restrained fury. Thololan's breath caught in his throat. The humans hadn't just built weapons, they had forged them. A single shot lanced out. A tungsten slug accelerated to a fraction of light speed. It struck the Eclipse's starboard shielding, and for a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the shield shattered, not with a burst of energy, but with a soundless, horrifying collapse, as if space itself had fractured under the impact. Malvar staggered as the ship listed violently. Alarms wailed, their harmonic tones discordant against the bridge's usual serenity. The damage reports flooded in structural breaches, power fluctuations, entire sections venting atmosphere. And still, the human ship advanced. Thololan's mind raced. This wasn't just a battle. It was a statement. The humans had let them believe in weakness. In desperation, they had allowed the Malthari to approach, to think themselves dominant. And now they were repaying that arrogance in fire and steel. On the view screen, the Iron Resolve's secondary batteries activated, rows upon rows of missile silos sliding open, their payloads glinting in the distant starlight. Thololan's instincts screamed at him to look away, but he couldn't, because in that moment, he understood. The distress call hadn't just been a beacon. It had been a challenge, and humanity had answered. The Malthari armada had come expecting a slaughter. They had arrived in waves, dozens of sleek, organic warships, their hulls shimmering with the aurora hues of ionized plasma, their flowing lines cutting through the void like blades of wind, carved crystal. To Malvar, it had been a foregone conclusion. A single human vessel, battered and alone, drifting near the edge of known space. It was not a battle, it was a harvest. And yet now, as the Iron Resolve's missile silos yawned open, revealing row upon row of gleaming warheads, Malvar felt the first cold trickle of doubt seep into his veins. Thololan's fingers trembled over the sensor console, the bioluminescent readouts casting his face in flickering violet. The data was impossible. The human ship's energy signatures spiked erratically, its power core cycling through surges that defied Malthari engineering principles. It wasn't just a warship, it was a storm, a contained cataclysm wrapped in steel, and it was laughing at them. Malvar's mandibles twitched in agitation. He had seen human vessels before, clumsy, brutish things, their designs crude compared to the flowing elegance of Malthari technology. But this was different. The Iron Resolve moved with a predator's grace, its thrusters flaring in precise controlled bursts as it adjusted its angle of attack. Then the missiles launched. Not one, not 10. Thololan's breath caught as the first wave streaked toward the Malthari vanguard. They were not the sluggish projectiles of early human warfare, nor the predictable plasma bolts of lesser species. These were hunters, sleek, adaptive, their trajectories shifting mid-flight as though guided by some unseen hand. The Malthari point, defense systems activated, their crystalline arrays unleashing beams of purple, white energy, slicing through the void in elegant arcs. A dozen missiles detonated prematurely, their warheads flaring into brief, violent suns. But the rest adapted. Thololan's eyes widened as the remaining projectiles split, their casings shedding like the skin of some ancient serpent, revealing smaller, faster submunitions beneath. The Malthari defenses recalibrated too late. The swarm descended, weaving through the defensive grid, like liquid through fingers. The first impact rocked the Eclipse Dancer, Malvar's flagship. The warhead didn't explode, not in the traditional sense. Instead, it unfolded. A fractal bloom of energy that chewed through the ship's aerogel, reinforced hull like acid through paper atmosphere, vented in a screaming rush, the ship's elegant spires collapsing inward as if crushed by an invisible fist. Malvar snarled an order, his voice raw with something no Malthari commander should ever feel. Fear. The armada shifted formation, their flowing organic lines tightening into a defensive lattice. But the humans weren't done. The Iron Resolve's railguns fired next. No warning, no charging hum. Just the silent, gut-wrenching lurch of relativistic death. The projectiles struck with the force of miniature asteroids, punching clean through the Dawn Chorus crystalline shielding as though it weren't even there. The ship listed, its elegant superstructure buckling under the onslaught before its power core destabilized in a silent violet-white eruption. Thalolan's mind reeled. This wasn't warfare as the Malthari understood it. This was annihilation, and the humans had only just begun. On the Iron Resolve's bridge, Colonel Samantha Harriman watched the carnage unfold with cold satisfaction. The Malthari had come expecting prey. They had found wolves. Instead, the void between stars was never truly silent. Malvar's flagship, the Eclipse Sovereign, thrummed with the low resonant pulse of its bioluminescent cores, the energy coursing through its veins like liquid starlight. The Malthari armada had come expecting a surrender, a plea for mercy, perhaps even a desperate futile volley from a cornered species. They had not expected this. The human vessel, the Iron Resolve, hung before them like a jagged blade against the velvet dark. Its hull was a brutalist slab of reinforced alloys, its edges sharp, its surfaces unadorned. No flowing organic lines, no aurora, lit grace, just cold, unyielding metal. And now, it had just torn apart the Dawn Chorus, as though the Malthari cruiser were made of brittle glass. Malvar's claws flexed against the command dais, the translucent surface beneath his fingers rippling with distress signals from the shattered fleet. His secondary hearts pounded in a rhythm he hadn't felt since his first battle. Fear. Not the clean, honorable fear of a warrior facing a worthy foe, but the gnawing, sickening dread of something unknown. Thalolan, his chief scientist, stood frozen at the sensor array, his silver-veined fingers trembling over the holographic readouts. The data made no sense. The human weapons had no charging cycle, no telltale energy buildup. Their railguns had simply fired, as if physics itself bent to their will. And now, the Iron Resolve was moving, not retreating, not regrouping. On the human warship's bridge, Colonel Samantha Harriman exhaled slowly, her breath fogging slightly in the chilled air. The Malthari armada was beautiful. In its way, crystalline spires wreathed in violet. White energy, their formations elegant. Their technology singing with an almost organic harmony. A shame they had chosen to be enemies. "Status on the main battery?" she asked, her voice calm. Captain David Imagan didn't look up from his console. "Loaded and ready. They're scrambling fighters now. Looks like they're trying to flank us." Harriman's lips curled. The Malthari were predictable. They fought like artists, their tactics all sweeping maneuvers and graceful feints. But war wasn't art, it was arithmetic. Fire at will. The Iron Resolve's main cannons roared to life. No warning, no grand spectacle. Just the shudder of the deck as the ship's magnetic accelerators hurled tungsten slugs across the void at speeds that turned them into relativistic spears. The first projectile struck the Eclipse Sovereign's forward shield array and punched straight through. The crystalline barrier flared, then shattered like ice under a hammer, the energy dissipating in a cascade of dying violet light. Malvar staggered as alarms shrieked through the ship. The impact had been clean, surgical, not a wild barrage, not a desperate spray of fire. A single precise shot aimed at the shield nexus. The humans weren't just strong, they were efficient. Thalolan's voice crackled over the comms, raw with disbelief. "Commander, they're weapons. They're not just kinetic. The slugs are coated in some kind of resonance disruptor. Our shields can't." Another impact. Another shield failing. Malvar's blood ran cold. The Malthari had come to teach humanity its place. Instead, humanity was teaching them. The Eclipse Sovereign shuddered again, its once pristine hull now marred by the smoking craters left by human munitions. Malvar gripped the command rail, his talons digging into the smooth, wind-carved alloy as another impact rocked the bridge. The air tasted of ionized metal and burnt ozone, the scent of a warship bleeding power. On the tactical display, the human vessel, indomitable, its transponder declared, hung motionless against the void, its matte, black hull absorbing the ambient starlight like a predator lying in wait. It hadn't moved. It hadn't needed to. Malvar's mind raced. This wasn't battle. This was execution. The Malthari Armada had arrived with the certainty of gods. Their fleet, a constellation of flowing silver and aurora, lit warships, their weapons humming with the promise of effortless victory. They had expected humanity to beg, to surrender, to break. Instead, the humans had sent one ship, and that ship was dismantling them. Thololin's fingers danced across the holographic interface, his bioluminescent veins pulsing with frantic energy as he parsed the sensor data. The human slugs weren't just tungsten. They were layered with something else. A molecular resonance field that destabilized Malthari shielding on contact, unraveling their energy matrices like thread pulled from a tapestry. "Commander," he breathed, "their weapons are learning." Malvar turned, his crest flaring in alarm. Thololin gestured to the readouts. Each impact, the disruptor pattern shifts. They're adapting to our shield harmonics in real time. A cold realization settled over the bridge. This wasn't just a warship, it was a predator. Colonel Samantha Harriman watched the Malthari fleet through the Indomitable's tactical display, her expression unreadable. The alien armada had come expecting a war of attrition, a battle of numbers. They had not expected this. "Captain Emigan," she said, her voice calm, status on the primary lance. David Emigan's fingers moved across his console, his cybernetic eye flickering as it processed data streams. "Charged and ready, Colonel, but they're already breaking." She nodded. The Malthari had made a fatal mistake. They had assumed humanity fought like them, with grand fleets, with overwhelming force, with the arrogance of those who had never known true desperation. But humanity had clawed its way up from the dirt of 1,000 battlefields. They had fought wars in the dark, with rusted blades and stolen bullets. They had learned the art of killing efficiently. And now they had perfected it. Malvar's comms erupted with panicked reports. Shields collapsing, engines failing, entire ships going dark as the Indomitables. Railguns picked them apart with methodical precision. He had thought the human vessel alone. He had been wrong. The void around them shivered. One by one, new signatures flickered onto the scanners. Silent, undetectable. Until now. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Human stealth frigates. Their blackened hulls, drinking in sensor sweeps. Their weapons humming to life. The Malthari Armada had come to crush a single ship. Instead, they had awakened the entire human fleet, and it had been listening the whole time. The void shivered again. Malvar's command spire, a towering structure of flowing violet alloy and bioluminescent panels, flickered as if caught in a storm. The air itself tasted metallic, charged with the afterburn of human railgun fire. His secondary displays, once pristine with the aurora glow of Malthari fleet coordination, now pulsed crimson ship after ship vanishing from the tactical grid. Impossible, the Indomitable was no longer alone. Around it, space itself seemed to peel back, revealing sleek, angular shadows. Human stealth frigates, their hulls matte, black and jagged, absorbing sensor pulses like a predator's hide swallowing light. They had been there the entire time. Malvar's claws dug into the command console, his crystalline exoskeleton flaring with stress, induced luminescence. The Malthari had come with overwhelming force, their armada a glittering tide of silver and violet, their weapons humming with the serene confidence of a species that had never known true desperation. A proximity alert shrieked. One of the stealth frigates, designation Revenant, slid past the Malthari flagship's shields as if they weren't even there. Its ventral railgun array cycled with a sound like bones breaking, and then, the flagship's starboard atmospheric condenser detonated in a bloom of ionized gas, the elegant wind-carved structure collapsing inward like shattered glass. Malvar staggered, his mind raced, clawing for logic. The humans had no right to this technology. Their species had barely mastered fusion when the Malthari first observed them. Their wars fought with crude kinetics and radioactive fire. Another frigate, the Wraith, unleashed a swarm of boarding drones. They moved like living shadows, slipping through shield harmonics, their monomolecular blades carving through bulkheads as if the Malthari's advanced alloys were wet clay. Malvar's comms erupted with screams, not of warriors, but of prey. Thololan, his chief scientist, stood frozen at the sensor array, her bioluminescent markings flickering in erratic pulses of distress. Their stealth systems, they don't just mask signatures, they consume them. Our scanners see nothing because there is nothing to see until they choose to strike. Malvar's throat tightened. This wasn't warfare. This was butchery. Aboard the Indomitable, Colonel Samantha Harriman watched the Malthari armada unravel with cold satisfaction. They had expected a desperate last stand. Instead, they had triggered Code Black, the oldest human doctrine: when outnumbered, outthink; when outgunned, outlast; and when the enemy believes they have won, unleash hell. Captain David Imagan, his cybernetic eye whirring, as it tracked the slaughter, exhaled slowly. They never even saw us coming. Harriman didn't smile. She didn't need to. The Malthari had made one fatal mistake. They had assumed humanity would fight fair. Section Faye. The butchers Bill the Malthari armada burned. Not in the slow, graceful arcs of dying starships. Those required structural integrity, the luxury of failing systems. No, this was annihilation in its purest form. Vessels rupturing mid-maneuver, crystalline hulls shattering like glass beneath an invisible hammer, streams of purple-white energy flaring once before vanishing into the void. The Indomitable moved among them like a specter, its blackened hull drinking in the light of dying ships, its weapon systems humming with terrible patience. Malvar's command throne shuddered as another cruiser vanished from the tactical display. His claws dug into the armrests, the organic metal yielding like flesh beneath his grip. He had commanded fleets for decades, fought in skirmishes against the Keldar hives and the Varathi syndicates. But this was not battle. This was erasure. His scientist, Thololan, stood rigid at her station, her bioluminescent markings flickering in frantic, arrhythmic pulses. The sensor feeds scrolled endlessly, each line of data more damning than the last. "They're not just evading our targeting systems," she whispered. "They're rewriting them. Our own weapons see them as friendly. Our shields register their attacks as..." A proximity alert screamed. The Indomitable materialized off their starboard flank, close enough that Malvar could count the scars on its armor through the viewport. For a single surreal heartbeat, the two ships hung suspended, predator and prey locked in mutual recognition. Then the human vessel flexed. A dozen railgun ports yawned open along its spine, each one exhaling a hypersonic round the size of a ground car. The projectiles crossed the distance in less time than it took to blink, punching through the Malthari flagship's energy dispersion fields as if they weren't there. The impacts didn't just breach the hull. They unmade it, the exotic alloys peeling back like rotten fruit, the structural lattice collapsing inward in a grotesque parody of gravity. Malvar's world tilted. Alarms wailed. The deck plates buckled beneath him, throwing crew into the air like dolls. He tasted blood, his own sharp and metallic, as his crest slammed against the command console. Through the chaos, one thought burned brighter than the fires consuming his ship. They were never hiding. They were waiting, aboard the Indomitable, Colonel Harriman watched the Malthari flagship's death throes with clinical detachment. The enemy vessel listed, its once gleaming hull, now a ruptured carcass venting atmosphere in frozen plumes. She had seen this before, dozens of times, across a dozen battlefields. The moment an opponent realized they were not fighting warriors, they were fighting vengeance, Captain Emigan cycled the railgun feeds, his cybernetic iris contracting as it processed the damage assessments. Secondary reactors going critical, their crews trying to eject the cores. Harriman didn't glance at the readouts. Let them. Emigan hesitated, just for a second. Before inputting the command, the Indomitable's targeting systems disengaged, allowing the Malthari their futile escape attempt. It wasn't mercy. It was message. See what we spare you. Remember what we don't. The Lowland's voice crackled over the comms, distorted by static and desperation. Why are you doing this? We offered peace. Harriman finally turned. Her reflection a ghost in the blood-smeared viewport. No, she said softly. You offered surrender. Outside, the Malthari flagship's reactors failed. The detonation lit the void like a newborn star, its light painting the Indomitable's hull in shades of violet and gold. Somewhere in the darkness, the rest of the human fleet stirred and answered. The wreckage of the Malthari armada drifted in a slow, silent ballet, twisted spars of crystalline alloy, shattered bioluminescent panels, still flickering their last violet pulses, the occasional frozen body tumbling end over end in the vacuum. The Indomitable coasted through the graveyard, its armored prow parting the debris like a blade through smoke. Malvar had expected death. He had not expected this. From the fractured remains of the luminous will, his flagship, now little more than a gutted husk. He watched through the fractured viewport as the human vessel passed. Its hull was scarred but unbroken, its railgun arrays still humming with residual charge. The Malthari had thrown everything at it. Ion lances, singularity projectors, even the forbidden atmospheric disruptors. None of it had mattered. The humans had not just fought. They had unmade. The Lowland's voice was a whisper over the failing comms. They're not scanning for survivors. Malvar's crest of sensory filaments lay flat against his skull, a primal reaction to the sheer wrongness of it all. Galactic warfare had rules. Even in annihilation, there were protocols, honors for the defeated, retrieval of the living. But the humans did not linger. They did not gloat. They moved with the cold precision of a storm passing over dead Earth. A flicker of motion caught his eye. One of the human drones, a sleek obsidian thing with a single crimson photoreceptor, drifted near the wreckage. It paused as if considering them, then turned away without firing. That was worse than a killing shot. They don't even see us as a threat anymore. Inside the Indomitable, Colonel Samantha Harriman stood before the tactical holodisplay, watching the last of the Malthari signals blink out. The battle had lasted 17 minutes. 17 minutes to break an empire's pride. Captain Emigan cycled through damage reports, his cybernetic eye whirring softly as it processed data. Minimal hull breaches, point defense arrays at Fey efficiency. They never even got through the ablative layers. Harriman didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the debris field where the Malthari's once gleaming fleet now floated in ruin. She had seen this before, not in the void, but in history. The broken ships of Pearl Harbor, the smoldering wreckage of the Blitz, the silent, irradiated cities of a world that had dared to test humanity's patience. Emigan hesitated. Orders, Colonel? She exhaled, long and slow. Send the recall beacon. The fleets waited long enough. A single pulse flared from the Indomitable's comm array, a signal riding on frequencies only human ships could parse. Somewhere in the dark, engines awoke. The Lowland's claws dug into the console as the new contacts flooded the scanners. Ships unlike anything the Malthari databases had recorded, monolithic dreadnoughts with spinal, mounted cannons, carriers disgorging swarms of needle, thin fighters, vessels whose silhouettes warped space itself, and at the center of the storm, a single word etched in burning plasma across a flagship's prow. Malvar's voice was hollow. They held back. Thololan's bioluminescent markings dimmed in dread. The humans had not come with one ship to fight. They had come with one ship to invite, and now the rest of them had arrived. The Malthari Armada hung frozen in the void, their flowing organic vessels caught in the sudden, terrible realization of what they had provoked. Thololan's claws trembled against the console, the bioluminescent panels of the command deck flickering erratically, as if mirroring the panic coursing through the crew. The sensors painted a nightmare, an expanding wave of human warships, their angular brutalist silhouettes cutting through the cosmic dark like knives. Malvar's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the rising hum of the ship's failing atmospheric ionizers. They held back. The words were a blade to the gut. The Malthari had assumed the Indomitable was a desperate last stand, a lone vessel hurled against them in defiance. But now, as the human fleet surged forward, their true nature was laid bare. This was not desperation. This was patience. Thololan's mind raced, parsing the data with mounting horror. The human dreadnoughts were not merely warships. They were monuments to war. Their hulls bore the scars of countless battles, their armor layered with exotic alloys that shimmered under scanning beams like the scales of some ancient predator. The spinal cannons were not just weapons, they were siege engines designed to crack worlds, and the carriers, disgorged not just fighters, but swarms of autonomous hunter-killers, their thrusters flaring violet as they spiraled into attack formations. At the heart of the storm, the flagship Vengeance loomed, its name etched in plasma across its prow, a declaration written in fire. Thololan's breath caught. The humans had not come to fight a battle, they had come to end one. Malvar's crest of crystalline spines flattened against his skull, his body rigid with the weight of his mistake. The Malthari had believed themselves the superior force, their flowing organic technology a testament to elegance and efficiency. But the humans they had built for survival, their ships were not graceful. They were not beautiful. They were relentless. Thololan's fingers danced across the console, pulling up the last transmission from the Indomitable. The human commander's voice was calm, almost bored, as if this were merely another engagement in a war that had already been decided. Recall beacons sent, fleets on its way. The words were a death knell. The Malthari Armada had come expecting to break a defiant enemy. Instead, they found themselves staring into the abyss of humanity's wrath, and the abyss stared back. Thololan's bioluminescence dimmed entirely, his body curling inward as the first human railgun rounds tore through the forward picket ships. The Malthari vessels, so proud in their flowing silver, violet designs, shattered like glass under the onslaught. Their elegant energy shields flared and collapsed, their hulls rupturing in blooms of purple-white fire. Malvar's voice was hollow. What have we done? The question hung in the air, unanswered, because the humans were not here to answer. They were here to win. Section Fae. The fleet moves. The void between stars was never truly silent. Malvar knew this. His people had sailed the cosmic winds for centuries, their ships gliding on currents of ionized plasma, their hulls singing with the resonance of the universe itself. But now, as the Indomitable's railgun salvos carved through his forward fleet, the silence was deafening. No war cries, no final transmissions, just the cold, methodical annihilation of his armada. Thololan's trembling fingers danced across the holographic display, his bioluminescence flickering erratically as he parsed the incoming data. The human ship was not alone, not anymore. The first distortion rippled across the Malthari sensors, a tear in the fabric of space, jagged and unnatural. Then another and another. Reality itself screamed as the human fleet arrived. They came not in the graceful arcs of Malthari fold, space drives, but in violent, shuddering bursts of ruptured physics. Their ships were brutal things, angular and unyielding. Their hulls scorched black from battles fought in systems the Malthari had never deemed worth conquering. Colonel Samantha Harriman's voice crackled across the comms, crisp and unburdened by doubt. All units, weapons free. The Malthari had expected a battle. What they received was an extermination. Human railguns, already proven lethal by the Indomitable, now spoke in chorus. Projectiles the size of skyscrapers punched through crystalline armor, detonating deep within Malthari vessels in sun. Bright flashes, plasma lances crude by galactic standards, sheared through command spires, bisecting admirals mid-order. Malvar's flagship, the Eternal Dawn, shuddered as something impacted its primary shield array. The Lowland's display flared crimson. "They're boarding us," the scientist whispered. Captain David Imagin's exo troopers hit the dawn like a storm. They moved in perfect sync, their armored forms flickering between visibility and nightmare, phasing through bulkheads, their weapons humming with stolen Malthari energy signatures. Malvar watched on the internal feeds as his warriors fell. Not in glorious combat, but in butchery. The humans did not duel. They did not announce themselves. They simply killed, efficient and relentless. A proximity alert wailed. The Lowland's hands froze. The Indomitable was turning. Its massive prow, still glowing from the heat of continuous fire, aligned directly with the Dawn's bridge. Malvar closed his eyes. He had thought humanity weak. He had been wrong. The last thing he heard was the scream of tearing metal as the human fleet closed its fist around his empire's throat. The dawn of eternal clarity shuddered as the last of its shield emitters failed. Bioluminescent panels flickered, their aurora hues dimming into sickly violet as power bled from the Malthari flagship. The Lowland's fingers trembled over the crystalline console, its once fluid energy currents now sluggish, erratic. The scent of ionized air stung his nostrils, sharp, metallic, wrong. He had studied human warfare. He had analyzed their crude tactics, their reliance on brute force over elegance. But this was something else. The exo-troopers moved like ghosts. Their armor, forged from scavenged Malthari alloys and reforged in human foundries, shimmered with stolen brilliance. They phased through bulkheads, their weapons humming with repurposed energy. His people's energy. The irony burned worse than the plasma scoring the walls. Malvar stood motionless at the center of the bridge, his silver-carved mantle dulled by emergency lighting. His warriors lay broken around him, their forms crumpled like discarded aerogel sculptures. The humans did not pause to admire their kills. They advanced, methodical, their visors reflecting the dying glow of Malthari systems. A proximity alert shrieked. The Lowland's gaze snapped to the main display. The Indomitable filled the screen. Its prow, blackened from continuous fire, loomed like a blade leveled at the Dawn's heart. The human warships' railgun arrays cycled, their charging sequence, a rhythmic pulse of crimson light. The Lowland's throat tightened. He had seen the projections, had laughed at them. No vessel that size should maneuver so fluidly, strike so precisely. Yet here it was. Malvar's voice, when it came, was hollow. "Open a channel." The Lowland hesitated. "High Commander." The holographic emitter sputtered to life, its projection wavering. Colonel Samantha Harriman's face resolved in fractured violet light. She looked weary, not triumphant, not vengeful, just tired. Malvar exhaled. "You fight well, for beasts." Harriman's lips thinned. "We learned from the best." The Indomitable fired. The world dissolved into white. The Lowland's last thought was of the archives, of the human transmissions they had intercepted centuries ago, pleading for aid, for understanding. How had they missed the warning in those voices? Not desperation. The dawn of eternal clarity shattered, its crystalline spires bursting into glittering dust, and the human fleet, silent as death, turned toward the heart of the Malthari Empire. The wreckage of the dawn of eternal clarity drifted in a slow, silent ballet, its once gleaming spires reduced to fractured shards that caught the distant starlight like scattered diamonds. The Indomitable hung motionless amidst the debris, its battered hull still humming with residual energy, its weapons cooling but not yet dormant. Colonel Samantha Harriman watched the destruction through the bridge's reinforced viewport, her reflection ghostly against the void. The Malthari flagship had been beautiful, crystalline, flowing, a testament to an empire that had once thought itself untouchable. Now, it was just another grave in the dark. Behind her, Captain David Emigan stood at attention, his hands clasped behind his back, his knuckles white. He had seen the transmission before the end, heard Malvar's last words. "You fight well." For beasts, the insult had been reflexive, instinctive, the dying gasp of a civilization that still refused to understand. Harriman exhaled, long and slow. Status. Emigan didn't need to consult the readouts. Primary targets neutralized. Secondary fleet elements are in retreat. He hesitated. They're broadcasting surrender codes. She closed her eyes. The Malthari had not offered humanity the same courtesy. When the first distress calls had echoed from human colonies, pleas for aid, for mercy, the Malthari had listened, recorded, and dismissed them as the cries of lesser beings. They had watched as entire worlds burned, their crystalline warships hovering just beyond the firelight, their commanders debating whether intervention was even worth the effort. And now, they begged. Harriman's fingers curled into fists. Emigan watched her, his expression unreadable. He had been at New Carthage when the Malthari bombardment began. He had seen the sky split open with purple-white fire, had dragged survivors from the rubble until his hands were raw. He remembered the silence afterward, the way the wind had carried the smell of ionized flesh for miles. "Orders, Colonel?" She turned from the viewport, her face etched with something deeper than exhaustion. "Recall the fleet." Emigan blinked. "Where?" "Letting them go." Harriman's smile was thin, razor sharp. "No." She tapped a command into the console before her. The Indomitable's comms array activated, its signal pulsing across the void. Not a surrender demand, not a threat. A recording, the same transmission the Malthari had intercepted centuries ago, the same desperate cries for help, the same voices trembling with fear. And beneath it, a single new line, spoken in perfect Malthari harmonics. "You were warned." The channel closed. Across the retreating Malthari fleet, panic flared. Ships that had been limping toward safety now veered wildly, their commanders realizing too late what the humans had done. The Indomitable's engines flared to life, its weapons recharging. Harriman leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on the distant glow of the Malthari homeworld. They had thought humanity weak. They had been wrong. The oath had been sworn in blood long ago, not vengeance, not conquest. "Remember us?" And now, the Malthari would. The Malthari armada, shattered like glass beneath the weight of their own miscalculation. Malvar's flagship, the Celestial Will, listed to starboard, its once pristine crystalline hull, now a lattice of fractures, leaking streams of ionized plasma like blood from a mortal wound. The command deck flickered between light and shadow, the bioluminescent panels dimming as power rerouted to failing systems. He clutched the railing, his talons scraping against the smooth alloy, his mind reeling. They had come expecting a broken species, a people who had barely clawed their way into the void. Instead, they had found Indomitable, a single ship, a single answer. The Lowland sensor array had been the first to detect the anomaly, the way the human vessel's energy signature pulsed in time with the distress call, how its weapons cycled, not with the erratic desperation of a cornered beast, but with the cold, rhythmic certainty of a predator counting down. Now, as the remnants of the Malthari fleet scattered, their formations dissolving into chaos, the truth settled over them like a suffocating shroud. Humanity had not forgotten. they had waited. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Colonel Samantha Harriman exhaled slowly, the weight of centuries pressing against her ribs. The holographic display before her painted the aftermath in stark relief, burning Malthari vessels. Their flowing organic silhouettes twisted and broken, their aurora-colored energy flickering like dying stars. She had expected satisfaction, vindication. Instead, there was only the quiet hum of the ship around her, the steady breathing of her crew, the knowledge that this was not an end, but a beginning. Captain David Imogen stood at her side, his gaze locked onto the retreating enemy. His knuckles were white where they gripped the console. "Orders, Colonel." Harriman didn't answer immediately. She studied the Malthari homeworld, a distant jewel of violet and silver, its atmosphere shimmering with the same energy that had once powered their arrogance. They had thought humanity weak. They had thought them forgettable. She reached for the comm, her voice steady. "All ships, this is Harriman. Hold position. Await response." Silence stretched across the void. A transmission, not from the fleeing Malthari. From elsewhere, the comms officer stiffened. "Colonel, we're being hailed." Multiple signals, unknown origin. Harriman's lips curled. The galaxy had been listening. And now, at last, it was answering. Far beyond the shattered Malthari fleet, in the dark between stars, new lights flickered to life. Hundreds of them, their silhouettes were unfamiliar, angular where the Malthari were fluid, brutal where the Malthari were elegant. Their energy signatures burned cold and bright, their hulls scarred from battles long past. They had heard the distress call, not the one from centuries ago, the one the Indomitable had just broadcast. The same message echoed across the void. "Remember us." And now, at last, the galaxy had. Harriman leaned back, her fingers interlaced. The Malthari had thought humanity alone. They had been wrong. The oath had been sworn in blood, and the universe, it seemed, had decided to honor it. Section Fe. The Oath Keepers. The Malthari fleet. What remained of it, drifted in stunned silence. Their once pristine formations had dissolved into scattered debris, their luminescent hulls flickering like dying stars. High Captain Velas clutched the edge of her command dais, her talons digging into the organic metal as she watched the new arrivals unfold across the void. They were not Malthari, they were not human, but they had come. Harriman's lips curled further, not in triumph, but in something far older, recognition. The Indomitable's archives had spoken of them in fragmented records, whispers of species who had once stood beside humanity before the long silence. Allies bound not by treaties, but by fire and shared defiance. The first transmission crackled through. A voice rough with static and age spoke in a language no living human had heard in centuries. Yet the translation protocols of the Indomitable recognized it instantly. We heard the call. The words were simple. The weight behind them was not. Velas' secondary heart stuttered as the alien fleet moved, not toward the humans, but around them, forming a perimeter, a shield. Their ships were brutal things, armor pitted from ancient wars, their weapon systems humming with dormant fury. And then, one by one, their transponder codes flickered to life. Clan sigils, war banners, each one matched a record in the Indomitable's databanks. The Oath Keepers. Harriman exhaled slowly. The last transmission from Earth, centuries ago, had not been a plea for help. It had been a promise, a vow etched into the fabric of the cosmos, a declaration that humanity would not die quietly. And somewhere, in the dark between stars, others had remembered. Velas' mind raced. The Malthari Dominion had always believed humanity's greatest weakness was their isolation. But now, as she watched the alien fleet align itself with the Indomitable, she understood the terrible truth. Humanity's strength had never been in their solitude. It was in the echoes they left behind. The oath had been sworn in blood, and the universe, it seemed, had not forgotten.